So let's say you found the skeleton. How would you tell if it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
All right, hey everybody, welcome back welcome for part 2 of the Spirit Science History watch through. This is my first time actually watching this, but there's a few things I want to get out of the way before we actually dive in. First of all, we had some super chats come in before the stream started, and I wanted to read them off. For $5 from Carrie Bronson, we have an offering to the void, praise its perfect absence. And from Command Cyborg for 22.22 sex, thank you very much for all the sex. We have for the great indifference of the void, inevitable. Thank you very much, guys. So before we get started, there is one thing I need to address about the creator of this video. Jordan, I don't want to try and pronounce his last name because it's long and Polish, and I'm bad at that. But this involves Jordan and a woman he was involved with, and an act that tends to get you demonetized, but it rhymes with grape. And there's a video linked in the description. It's the only link in the description other than mine. And it's him admitting to it. So, it actually made me reassess whether or not I actually wanted to go ahead and continue with any of this. And I decided that yes, because ultimately it's still stupid, it's still up on the internet, and people are still believing this nonsense. So, I mean, whatever. Oh, and yes, thank you, Intrigued Feline, for reminding me. I did, in fact, hit 5,000 subscribers yesterday, thanks in no small part to Vice Rhino having me on as a guest for him while he was getting ready for his daughter's birthday and such. So, yep, that was very helpful. That got me, I can attribute essentially all of the about 800 subscribers that I've received in the last day and a half to that. So, big thank you to Vice Rhino. There will be a 5,000 5,000 subscriber special coming up at some point. I don't know exactly when. I'm not also sure exactly what, but it'll be there. So, and now everyone should be able to hear me fine, and you should be able to get the video. So we were just talking about last time on Dapper Dino, we were talking about how Jordan thinks that a pole swap isn't just the magnetic field reversal. He thinks it's the actual crust of the Earth coming loose and sliding around over the mantle while everything else just keeps on spinning. Which, hopefully I don't have to explain this to you, but that is just completely crazy. Yeah, I'm glad I made that video for Vice Rhino too. It did take a while though. My goodness, I was pulling up so many different resources and animating, and whew, yeah, it was quite a project, but I'm very happy with the outcome. So, but anyway, without further ado, we're gonna listen to Jordan talk to us about the magnetic fields, and it's gonna be dumb, but we're gonna enjoy it. And also, I have some new sets, so you're going to be seeing a few visual changes to the channel here. Basically, I took the reset of my computer as an opportunity to update the way I'm streaming. So this is my set for when it's just me. So I'll have chat up and whatever video or whatever it is I'm watching, or if I'm doing a game on my Off Topics channel, that'll be there. I have a new set for Kent with Bent, if you haven't seen that. I also have an alternate set for Kent with Bent if we have an extra guest on, which we like to have every once in a while. So, yeah. Anyway, let's get some Jordan nonsense in here.
It was the magnetics becoming more and more warped that's causing many of the problems we've seen in the last 20 years.
What?
Birds follow the magnetics of the planet to migrate, and they'd be ending up in places they shouldn't be. Whales were continually beaching themselves in the 90s because they followed these magnetics, which led them to land where there should have been water.
So I actually don't know of any significant instances of birds going off course. It is the case, however, that birds have been migrating at unusual times of the year, which is more to do with climate change than it is with the magnetics. So I can't say for certain that the bird thing is nonsense. However, the whale beaching in the 90s has been pretty reliably attributed to the United States Navy using active sonar in areas that had high whale populations. And I don't know if you know, but whales are very sensitive to sound, and naval sonar is very confusing to them, and it's very, very loud. So, yeah, it's mostly the United States Navy. Nestle20 says, once I asked, why do people this stupid exist? I stopped asking the question for a while, but whenever I see Jordan, it takes me back to when nonsense felt new. Yeah, it's... Look, I'm someone who has a regular show that's basically drinking up to Kent Hovind, and even Kent Hovind looks completely reasonable compared to this nonsense from Jordan. Jordan is just a different breed of crazy. And also a different breed of scummy, because I encourage everyone to click on the link that I have first up in the description to get a bit of insight into Jordan's criminal behavior, if you will. Of course, alleged, and also admitted, but not technically convicted, so I cover my legal bases there. I don't want to be sued for slander.
As for humans, you know how on the night of the full moon there are more rapes, murders, and violent crimes than any other night of the lunar cycle?
I think we actually went over this before. I think I might have gone back a few minutes, but no, there isn't. There really isn't more of that. Yeah, it's just not really a thing.
Well, the moon affects the magnetics of the Earth.
No, it really doesn't. We did go over that. I'm sorry. I went to a slightly earlier spot. But yeah, so the moon affects the Earth primarily through gravity. It has essentially no effect on the magnetic field of Earth. It's far enough away that you're basically beyond where the Earth actually has any real magnetic field. So now, it is true that the magnetic, force does follow the inverse square law. And technically, you're never far away enough to be completely outside of that field if you were to, think about it in isolation. But you can more or less think of the Van Allen radiation belts as sort of the limit of Earth's magnetic field being a force that actually has any significant influence over charged particles. And the reason for that is because the Van Allen belts are made of charged particles that have been caught in Earth's magnetic fields. So the moon is outside the Van Allen belts. It's actually one of the concerns with the whole Apollo missions was, one, how do you deal with the radiation in the Van Allen belts, because it's pretty high there, and then two, once you're outside of the Van Allen radiation belts, you're being exposed to basically the interstellar, galactic cosmic rays. And basically the conclusion was, well, we won't be there for very long, and the moon will be blocking out about half of them, which is true. So it was just one of those things where it's the dose that makes the poison. There won't be that much dosage. But yeah, the moon doesn't affect Earth's magnetic field in any significant way.
Slightly. But the magnetics are so warped right now, it's affecting how we think and act as a planet. Our collapse of social structure is related to the geomagnetics of the Earth.
Has social structure collapsed? I mean, now I know that Jordan made this a long time ago. I think this might even be 20 years old. And sure, I mean, there have been revolutions and protests and whatnot, but those have been pretty much a constant throughout human history. I don't think society is any closer to collapsing now than it has been in the past. It's do you honestly think that human civilization is closer to collapse now than it was, say, at the height of the Black Death, when, 2/3 of Europe was devastated and huge portions of the rest of the old world were, falling ill and dying? I don't think so. Or, hey, what about the late Bronze Age collapse, when basically every known civilization basically took a break for a few hundred years? That seems like we were closely then. Was the Earth's magnetic field more messed up at the end of the Bronze Age? I don't know.
Or perhaps it's the other way around.
I would love to know Jordan's causal mechanism for societal upheaval causing the magnetic field of the Earth to change. That would be interesting. But I don't think he has any such causal mechanism handy.
There's one other thing that we need to discuss about polar shifts. They always line up with a consciousness shift. They are interrelated. Thoth lived on Atlantis for a very long time, and he told us that he saw the Earth shift 5 times.
A reminder, when Jordan here says Thoth told us, what he means is some guy wrote down in a book that a spirit spoke into his brain words that he should write down in a book. We don't actually have any ancient artifacts or anything that would indicate that this even could be a possibility. You have to accept the channeling claims of basically crazy people.
Watching the sun rise in the east, and then the west, then the east, then the west. This is how to explain why during a...
So the thing is, and I've talked about this before when Jordan first went over the idea that a pole shift isn't just a magnetic pole reversal, it's the actual crust of the Earth flying around like crazy. There's this thing called the conservation of momentum. And while it's not actually a real problem in the real world, because it's a constant acceleration, and it's a fairly low-level one, flat earthers like to complain about, oh, you think we're spinning at 1,000 miles an hour? That's crazy. It's like, well, no, it's not crazy, because first, linear velocity, not, angular velocity, but there is a difference there. But the other thing is, like, okay, it's not really a big problem, unless, of course, you are, in fact, going to have a massive change to that rotation, right? So what Jordan here is proposing is basically that, the Earth's spinning essentially stopped or reversed for people on the surface, which means you're essentially going to be flung in the opposite direction to, from which you were essentially spinning immediately at the angular velocity at which you were spinning, which at the equator, yeah, it's about 1,000 miles an hour. Like, this is not something that the biosphere is going to survive. Like, that's not an option left to the biosphere to just kind of wait it out. So, yeah, not sure why Jordan thinks this is a reasonable option. But, hey, that's okay. We'll just keep on plowing through. Is that Cuba? No, apparently it's supposed to be Lemuria. I don't know.
Consciousness shift at the end of Lemuria, it sank beneath the oceans and Atlantis rose. If the crust was spinning randomly around the planet, many geological events such as continents rising and falling would take place.
Okay, great, but also everyone everywhere would have died. Literally. Not even everyone. Everything, basically any bigger than a bacterium. This would be a catastrophic extinction level event. In fact, even the bacteria might go extinct because to get the Earth's crust to slide around that way would require friction that would probably just melt the entire Earth. Like, nothing could possibly survive this. It's just complete nonsense.
Now that we have an understanding of polar shifts, we can continue with this drama on Atlantis.
Oh, yay.
26,000 years ago, we were exactly where we were today on the precession of the equinox. We had...
Oh, I mean, that is about how long the precession of the equinox takes, so yeah, that's true.
Gone through our falling asleep phase, and we were about to begin waking up. It was at this point that there was a small consciousness shift. We actually went down in consciousness,
oh, no.
not up. A piece of Atlantis about the size of Rhode Island sank into the ocean. This caused a tremendous amount of fear within the Atlanteans.
I like how we have this detailed discussion about stages of consciousness and the geography of Atlantis, but it's basically all just based slightly on Plato and then mostly just on, hey, one guy said this thing one time, and apparently people are just happy to go with that. It's something. I don't know.
Because they thought they were going to lose the whole continent, like what happened with Lemuria. Because of the consciousness shift, one of the bigger things they lost was their connection to the future. They couldn't foresee big events such as the potential sinking of their home.
Or whatever it is that got the Jews to go back in time. Because remember, Jews are futures. The Hebrews came back in time from space after having failed to advance. Somehow.
After about 200 years, this fear began to subside. Now, in both the Bible and the Sumerian records, the accounts of Adam, Eve, and all of their children were recorded to have exceptionally long lifespans, like 900 years or so. So 200 years for us back then is like 20 years for us today. We'll explain how we got there soon.
I mean, you could also just recognize that, given that in historical records, like the Sumerian Kings list, people are listed as living for, or not even living, reigning as king for tens of thousands of years. Maybe the ancient Near East had this thing with exaggerating ages. No. We should just go with consciousness shifts and 900-year-old humans in Atlantis. That's more reasonable.
Things kind of settled for a while, and then between 13,000 and 16,000 years ago, a comet approached the Earth. Because we were living at a high consciousness across all dimensions, the Atlanteans became aware of it before it hit.
Wait, I thought we had just lost the ability to see major future events. But now the Atlanteans, who just lost this ability, use this ability to detect the approaching comet. See, this is one of the things about that bugs me about Jordan's content, is he will forget what he just established like 5 minutes earlier. It's like he never said it. And I don't get how he thinks that that's a reasonable way to go about things, right? Like, even if we took this as just like fan fiction of Atlantis, or just a fantasy novel or something, it still fails. Because even ignoring all the problems with this being real, it isn't internally consistent. And for $5 from Carrie Bronson, we have, I appreciate the exaggerated ragdoll boobs and lips on the pink ones. Go ahead and take that out of context. Thank you.
A great conflict occurred in Atlantis. The Martians,
Oh,
who
no.
were in the minority, even though they were in control, wanted to blow it out of the sky with their...
Wait, last time... Oh, no, the Atlanteans had resisted Martian control, but then later on the Martians had taken control anyway. Okay, never mind. I was just trying to get the narrative straight.
laser technology. However, the Nacals had learned of the comet's true nature, and the Atlanteans protested. They said that the comet was in divine order. They had to allow it to take place naturally. Let it hit the Earth.
Well, that's dumb. Okay. A comet hitting the Earth is just general, all around, not going to be good. Now, it's possible that, a comet, if we have a situation where, like, humans are only living on Atlantis at this point, and it's going to hit, land somewhere else on the opposite side of the globe, then, I mean, whatever, who cares at that point, right? But generally speaking, comets hitting the Earth, especially now, would just be bad. There's no good option with a comet hitting the Earth. At best, it causes no harm. That's the best case scenario for basically bolide impacts. So in case you guys don't know, bolides are anything that strikes the Earth from outer space. So it includes comets, asteroids. I suppose I would have to double check with like my geology contacts, but I think it would even include, hypothetically, a significant amount of like artificial material. So like if some big old satellite hit the ground and made a crater, I think that would still count as a bolide impact, but I'm not sure, so don't take my word on that one. But yeah, basically the best case scenario for a bolide impact is no significant effects. Worst case scenario is global extinction. Like, that's the range. There's no positive options. So anyone who says, oh yeah, comet hitting the Earth, it's a great idea, that's dumb. Now, there are cases where you still might not want to do anything about it because the process of trying to move a comet out of the way would be so prohibitive that it would actually cause more suffering than letting it hit. So for instance, like, if it would require, like, all the world's resources for like years to make something big enough to stop a small asteroid, well, the small asteroid may cause less damage than you completely upending the global economy, which is what most people rely on to like not die. So, but generally, yeah, if you had a magical machine like the Martians did to stop a comet, anyone saying that you shouldn't do it is an idiot, and you shouldn't listen to them.
That's what's supposed to happen. The Martians fought the Atlanteans, but in the end they gave in. The Martians agreed to let it hit the Earth.
Well, then how were the Martians in charge? What does it mean to be in charge if when you see impending doom, you're not allowed to fix it because the people you're in charge of say that you're not supposed to? It sounds like the Atlanteans are in charge.
When the time arrived, it came screaming into the atmosphere, plunging into the Atlantic Ocean just off to the western shores of Atlantis, near where Charleston, South Carolina is now.
Okay, so there should be a crater in Charleston, right? So let's double check. Are there any craters near Charleston? Because remember, this is a historical event, right? So, or I guess it's still technically in our prehistory because 26,000 years ago. But like, let's see. let's check how old is Barringer Crater in Arizona, which is a cool place, by the way. So let's see. So let's see. Let's 50,000 years ago. So Barringer Crater, which is still a very clearly defined crater that you can see, is about 50,000 years old. So this impact is about half as old. Okay, so now we need to see if there is a South Carolina. Yes, so let's see. Let me just rewind just a second to make sure I get exactly. Oh, so yeah, South Carolina. Okay. South. Come on. I'm trying to use my phone and it's South Carolina. Impact crater. Is there such a thing? Who wants to place bets? Let's see. Oh, there is the Johnsonville crater, which has been interpreted as an impact crater, so we have that. So let's see. Let's look into the Johnsonville crater. Hey, maybe there's something to this. Maybe this is a reasonable thing. Let's see. The Johnsonville crater, circular geographic. Some scientists say it is an impact crater, so there's that. But it's generally believed to be an upthrust from the center. Oh no, so upthrust would be from the impact. Okay. But okay, so that might actually be a reasonable location for it. Although it's not where he's indicating on the map. It's significantly farther north and east. That's also not confirmed, but it's from the late Eocene, 35 million years ago, not 26,000 years ago. So no, it doesn't work. Yeah. So no, Jordan, there's no evidence for a 26,000-year-old bolide impact near South Carolina. At least not as far as I can tell. If anyone finds any evidence, let me know, because I'll issue a retraction. I will pull back on that statement if someone actually finds a crater for me that matches this.
Only that was at the bottom of the ocean at the time.
South Carolina was at the bottom of the ocean at the time? So 26,000 years ago, we were essentially at a glacial maximum. So sea levels were about as low as they've ever been in the entire history of the planet. South Carolina was not underwater 26,000 years ago. Just,
The remnants of the comet are now scattered across 4 states.
I mean, you say that, but you pictured Barringer Crater, so okay.
And science has definitely determined that it hit at...
Yeah, okay, so that is the Johnsonville crater. The problem with the Johnsonville crater is, yeah, it's 35 million years old.
At least 12,000 years ago, if not more.
I like how he says, at least 12,000 years ago, if not more. Yes, it is technically true that the date of 35 million years ago is at least 12,000 years ago. But that's not normally how you would say that. It's technically true, but still misleading.
More. They're still finding pieces today. Although the main portion struck near Charleston.
Oh, we get a map of Atlantis. It's funny how we don't actually have any geological evidence of an Atlantis in that area, and that's a pretty big area. But okay.
Charleston, a few fragments actually hit the main body of Atlantis, crashing into an area right where the Martians were living, killing a huge portion of their population. They were pissed.
I mean, yeah, they should have been able to prevent that. That's crazy.
They said, it's all over, we're divorcing you, and we're gonna do...
Let's see. Silver Hollow says, sorry Dapper, but I gotta decline your request to look into the video vape allegations. Really enrage me, and I have blood pressure problems already. No, that's fair, man. Look, if it's something you don't think you can handle, which is perfectly understandable, then please don't watch that. I would say, though, that it's probably important, if you can, to know who we're talking about here. So, while I will respond to Jordan, he's not someone who I have any more, even basic respect for. So, yeah. Yeah, he's basically a garbage person.
Whatever we want. You can do what you want, but we will never listen to you again. We know this whole bit. We've seen it in divorced families throughout the world. And the children? Well, look at our modern world today.
Oh, Raven N says, how did Martians survive in Earth atmosphere? Oh, so we already explained this. See, in the past, Mars had a Earth-like atmosphere. But then because the Martians engaged in the Satan experiment and separated themselves from the unity of nature, that ruined the atmosphere. So they time traveled, maybe? But anyway, they teleported themselves to Earth and started taking over Atlantis because of the Lucifer experiment. Yeah. Which made them entirely emotionless, but also very angry. And I will have to leave it up to Jordan to explain how you can be both entirely emotionless, but also very angry. It doesn't make sense to me.
Today, we are the children. You can guess what the Martians did next. Their primary...
I literally can't because the Martians don't make any sense. Because in one instant, Jordan says that they're cold, cool, rational, and in the other one he says they're bloodthirsty rage monsters. So I don't know.
primary interface with the reality was control, and when their anger rose to meet their desire for control, they decided to take over the Earth.
Of course they did. Why wouldn't they? What? You just said a few sentences later that the Martians said to the Atlanteans, you guys can do whatever you want, but we're going to do what we want, and we don't have to listen to you. That's not the kind of thing you say when you... Oh, only Jews can do time travel. That's a good point. Right, I forgot. But, yeah, so that's not really a good... Like, you don't say to someone, oh, hey, you go your way, we're going to go ours, as like a prelude to conquering. So, which one was it? Was there a granted acrimonious divorce, or did one side decide to conquer the other one? Because those are kind of different. You can't really say that both happened at the same time. But maybe there's an unstated, like, time gap here. Maybe there was a divorce, and then a few hundred years later, or a few thousand years later, or something, then the Martians decided to take over. But it would be nice to have heard that.
They began to once again create a complex like the one they built on Mars long ago to try and create another synthetic Merkabah. If they had succeeded, they would have gained control over everything on the planet.
Why? Don't the Atlanteans and the Nakals and the Space Jews have their own real Merkabahs, apparently? Because it's a spiritual tool that everyone has access to unless you decide to go through with the Lucifer experiment, I think is how this works. So why would a synthetic Merkabah be able to take over the planet when all of the natural, I guess, all organic, probably gluten-free Merkabahs, why don't they work?
The only thing was, around 50,000 Earth years.
Oh, Daniel Glasser says, hey, I'm Jewish and I can't time travel, so maybe only some can time travel. Yeah, that's the thing. Only Jews can time travel, but not all Jews can time travel. It's sort of like, you know, all ducks are birds, but not all birds are ducks. You have to be an advanced but also failed future space Jew. That's the rule.
Had passed since they had built a Merkabah, and they didn't quite remember how to do it. But they thought they did. The Martians built the buildings in Atlantis. They set up the whole experiment, threw the switch, and lost control.
There's a switch? It looks like you just get a bunch of pyramids, but okay. But what does it mean to control a Merkabah? Apparently, what it means is that it doesn't explode like a nuclear bomb. I don't even know.
The destruction was immense. In this reality, you can hardly make a greater error than to create an out-of-control Merkabah. The experiment began to rip open the dimensional levels.
What does it mean to rip open dimensional levels? I thought these were like alternate versions of reality. Is there a physical barrier between them? What happens when they're all open to each other? Don't things come and go through these dimensions all the time, according to Jordan? Like, I know it's in a later video, much later video, but if you watch the three-part video series I did about his alien conspiracy theories, he thinks that the reptoids who rule the entire universe and keep everyone ignorant to their existence, except apparently, you know, for David Icke and Jordan, because they're special. Those guys come from a different dimension. Did they have to rip open the dimensional levels to get here? I don't know. But sure, this sounds very devastating. This undefined, who knows what it means event looks dangerous. I mean, look, there's a tear in the sky, like it's, you know, the beast with a billion backs from Futurama.
Not the higher ones, but the lower ones.
Oh.
To give an analogy, if you took a knife and slit open your stomach, the stomach acids would seep into other parts of the body that it's not supposed to be in.
Gross analogy, but okay. Oh, the leaky dimension. It's the second dimension. We live in the third dimension. So, oh, you know what? Maybe it's like that episode of like Star Trek, right? Where they're flying along and then suddenly the ship starts shaking for no reason, and it turns out that they've been caught in like a stream of little 2D organisms. Or maybe it's like a similar episode in the Orville where they accidentally go through like a spatial anomaly and it's a 2D world there, and like another ship goes through the anomaly and gets completely flattened and then re-expanded, and the guy who was flying it dies, and so they had to create like a space bubble and go through. Maybe it's like that. I don't know. You guys let me know in the chat whether or not you think it's more like the Star Trek episode or more like the Orville episode. 1 for Star Trek, 2 for Orville, and 3 for I don't watch either of them. So here we go.
That's like ripping open the dimensions. The Martians almost destroyed the Earth. The environmental disaster we are experiencing today is nothing in comparison.
So how come we don't have, like, any evidence of a crazy environmental disaster 26,000 years ago? Or I guess we'll give it a couple thousand years. So, you know, anytime, or even more, well, in the 20,000 to 26,000 years ago. Too many people here who are not watching either Star Trek or the Orville. You guys need to get on that. But it looks like right now the Orville is winning. Okay. Woden Toad, I agree. They are both fantastic episodes.
Though today's disasters are a direct result of these events. Because of this tear in the dimensional levels, a huge number of lower dimensional spirits and beings were thrown out of their comfort zone and into these higher levels. They were forced into a world that they did not know or understand. To survive, they needed bodies, and began automatically entering into the bodies of people. For every human body, there were hundreds of lower dimensional spirits inhabiting them.
So yeah, someone said it in the chat, I guess you've seen this one, but yeah, this is almost body thetans. Almost. Okay, so I'm getting a few more votes. I think the Orville is winning by a little bit, not a whole lot. So I guess we're going to go with, we'll just call it for the Orville. Although, yeah, both really good episodes. Yeah. Also, in case you guys don't know, maybe you guys care, but production on season 3 of the Orville has started back up. They've had to stop like twice. So it is eventually going to happen. But anyway, so there are a few differences between this and body thetans, but the basic idea is the same. So in Scientology body thetans, the idea is that these are actually the souls of people whose physical bodies were destroyed to reduce the galactic population by basically, apparently, a combination of like Space Emperor plus Ebenezer Scrooge. You know, the whole, if they're going to die, then they should do it and decrease the surplus population. Yeah. And then they're brainwashed, and then they are confused and fly into human bodies. In this, there is a little bit of a difference. These were apparently never normal human spirits. They were somehow more primitive, lower entities that are thrust up into a confusing world and attach themselves to humans for some reason. I'm not sure why humans would be more comforting to them than just existing. Because one of the things is, at least in the Scientology body thetan idea, the spirits were originally creatures like humans, right? So attaching themselves to a body like one that they used to inhabit and used to identify with themselves makes some degree of sense, right? It's familiar. I don't know why these guys do it. So, in fact, actually, I'm going to go ahead and say that Scientology is currently making more sense than Jordan. And it's not very often that I say that anything in Scientology makes more sense than anything not in Scientology. So.
These beings were Earthlings like us, but
Wait,
very
what?
different.
What do you mean they were Earthlings like us, but very different? They came from another dimension. They came from the second dimension, apparently. Which... whatever.
Not coming from this dimension. It was a catastrophe. probably the biggest the Earth has ever seen.
I like the horror music there. It's a really good little musical sting.
The reason the Nakals were special wasn't just because of their incredibly high consciousness, making them like guides of Atlantis. They also had achieved what today we call immortality.
What is it like what we call today immortality? It's like Atlantis was what we call today land, and they had what today we call houses, and it was filled with what we call today people, and they ate what we call today food. What is the point? That's not really that's just a presentation style thing. Like, why would you go and say that? It's just dumb.
Let's just say they figured out a way to keep their body healthy and young for as long as they chose, and could choose to pass on whenever they desired it.
Yeah, that's basically what it means to be immortal, even in normal circumstances.
When reincarnating, they do not suffer the great memory loss that we do when we incarnate. They did it through their expanded consciousness and tantric interdimensional sex meditations.
Now that actually does sound interesting. I would like to know which kinds of tantric sex meditations I need to do in order to be able to reincarnate with my memory intact, or just opt not to die. So, if anyone has the source on that, let me know, because I won't stream it, but I'll check it out. I did watch Babylon 5, Alex, yes.
This is how Thoth was a priest king of Atlantis for thousands of years, and stayed on Earth until 15 years ago, when he gave all of his memories and understanding about sacred geometry to a man named Drunvalo Melchizedek.
Well, isn't that guy lucky? But, so hold on, Thoth was on Earth until 15 years before this video, which I guess makes it now like 35 years ago or something. Why? Like, why did he have to give it to some guy? Why not just appear in front of people with his weird bird head and be like, hey guys, you're at this low level of consciousness, things are kind of crappy, but we could use my techniques because, you know, I'm a great immortal, all-powerful being with a bird for a head. Or, well, with the head of a bird. And I gotta be honest, if an actual bird-headed dude showed up and was like, hey, here's all the wisdom of the ancients, and to prove it, look, I'm a magical Superman guy, I'd probably believe him. That'd be pretty good. So why do that? Why not? I don't know. But sure, he gave it all his wisdom to Drunvalo Melchizedek, who then wrote a book that can't be verified about anything. Yeah, we'll just go with it. Sure, why not?
The Merkabah is formed out of 3 star tetrahedrons overlaid on top of each other. 2 of them are counter-rotating and the third is stationary. When the Merkabah is formed with the unity consciousness, it is formed internally with love. When it is formed externally through the Lucifer experiment, it does not have that love and can become unstable very quickly.
Okay, so inside of you, you're turning your love into a bunch of triangles and then rotating some of them. I'm not even sure what that means. How do you shape love into a triangle? I don't know. That's a very... like, I know all of those words, but I don't think they make a sentence the way Jordan thinks they do.
The Martians' attempt at controlling the world took place on one of the small islands in the west of Atlantis. This place today is known as the Bermuda Triangle.
What? Okay, so that's another conspiracy theory that I didn't know, but I'm not surprised that Jordan has bought into. Apparently, the Bermuda Triangle, which actually doesn't have an abnormally high, amount of disappearance of ships or airplanes, given how heavily trafficked it is. Apparently, all those disappearances are caused by weird Luciferian Merkabah experiments. Sure.
It's a triangle because the top of the stationary tetrahedron of the Merkabah is actually sticking out of the water there, which causes a huge electromagnetic imbalance in that area.
It's funny, though, because we can measure electromagnetism, and there isn't one there. Yeah. Like, at the most you can say is there might be a few magnetic anomalies that are probably geological in nature, but there aren't, like, unusual electrical storms. No matter what you might have heard from weirdos talking about, electric mist or whatever. There's no actual verifiable phenomenon there.
Many planes and boats have reported to have gone missing there. They just vanished without a trace.
So it's true, though. But the thing is that if you control for how busy a patch of ocean is, and, like, the rate at which ships disappear, like, how many ships per, number of ships that travel the area disappear per year, it's not unusual. It's not any less safe than other parts. In fact, it's significantly safer than some parts of the ocean. Because it's a relatively calm area, unless there's, like, hurricanes or something.
Balance is multidimensional, and in many cases, these ships and planes have been sucked into different dimensions, never to be seen again.
Citation needed on that. Yeah. We're going to need a citation on that. In fact, I might even have that as a video. Oh, I don't. You know what, though? I'm going to try and add it. So, just for you guys, I'm going to slightly modify my actual streaming setup. Because, yeah, that's something that needs a citation. So, yeah. You know what? I don't have it up. I'm not going to do it. I lied. Sorry about that.
That Merkabah is still there on the seafloor today, but from what I know, it's going to be corrected soon.
Oh.
The Nicals did their best to save Atlantis.
From what you know, it's going to be corrected soon. What? How do you know that? Who told you that? Was it room below Melchizedek? What? What? How is this going to be noticeable? Is anyone going to see a giant spinny triangle made of not love rise out of the ocean? That's, a significant fraction of the size of the Earth? Is any of that going to happen? Like, I just don't know what's happening right now.
They sent most of the lower dimensional beings back, at least as many as they could, and sealed up the dimensional tear. Despite this, the situation got really bad, really fast. All of the economic systems collapsed. Financial, social, and all concepts of how life ought to be completely broke down. Everyone on Atlantis began getting sick with weird diseases, and the entire continent went into a state of survival. Life was no longer about living. It became about surviving until tomorrow. It was a literal hell on Earth.
That does sound pretty miserable. And this was because of a Merkabah that's still there. So my immediate question is, why isn't this a problem in that area right now? If the Merkabah that caused this is still there, why is it that the Caribbean islands inside the Bermuda Triangle are mostly, just sort of tropical islands where everything's pretty normal? There's no, like, giant plagues wiping everything out? I don't know. It's weird. It's weird that that's not happening.
Nicals had no idea what to do. They were children compared to the events that had been thrust upon them. So, they prayed. They prayed to the highest levels of conscious life in the universe, asking for help from anyone who could hear them. The problem was reviewed on many high levels of life, who I am drawing as the Justice League because the 11th and 12th dimensions are completely incomprehensible to us in our current state. What they told us was this: we were going to fall. We were going to hit rock bottom, level 1, the lowest place we possibly could be in the universe and still survive. Also, we were changing polarity. We were no longer a female species, so we were starting from square one as a male species.
Oh, so we went from being 14-year-old girls to, I guess, 1-year-old boys? Sure. Yeah. Why not? That makes sense.
And finally, and this was the shocker, we would only have 13,000 years to return to Christ consciousness. Normally, it takes hundreds of thousands of years for a species to get to Christ consciousness.
Okay.
We had to do it in a fraction of the time.
Or else what? That's the thing that I would like to know. Or else what? What happens if humanity doesn't reach Christ consciousness in 13,000 years? Because, I mean, apparently humanity as a species isn't at Christ consciousness right now. But, I mean, things aren't perfect, and there's a lot of craziness and horribleness, but also they're not as bad as we were describing as, say, on Atlantis. I mean, what? Why can't things like this continue for 14,000 years? 15,000 years? I mean, things are actually on the upswing. So I would like for, I don't think it's going to happen, but I would like for Jordan to tell us what happens in 13,000 years that we need to be at Christ consciousness to avoid. Or what is someone going to come and, like, you know, punch the human race in the face if they're not advanced enough in 13,000 years? I don't know. Why does he mix every religion with conspiracy? I think, honestly, it's because that gives everyone who he talks to, or nearly everyone, something that's familiar to them that he can, like... It's like a gotcha, right? So, are you a Christian? Are you a Buddhist? Are you Muslim? Are you... do you like ancient Greek literature? Are you a conspiracy theorist? There's something in there that Jordan's talking about that you're like, oh yeah, I know about that. And I think that's what it is. I think it's to hook as wide an audience as possible.
If we didn't, we would not survive.
Why?
This has never happened before in the universe, ever.
Humans are just that special, but apparently also suck that much. Okay.
Thoth, who was the priest king of Atlantis at the time, learned that they would have to perform this experiment on themselves.
Wilton Toad said, do we get individual punches, or is it the planet as a whole? I'm going to go ahead and say it's the planet as a whole, but... Oh, Christ consciousness apparently comes from a tomb. Okay.
They received instructions from the highest levels of life, and they went on their way. Thoth proceeded with a being named Ra and Aragat, who were previous kings of Atlantis, and began the experiment. To understand what they did, we have to talk about consciousness grids.
Okay, maybe this will be an explanation for something.
A planetary grid is an etheric crystalline structure that envelops the planet and holds the consciousness of any one species of life.
Okay, so crystals are a form of matter in which the atoms are arranged in a regular geometric lattice. So this apparently is a grid of etheric crystals. The problem with that is that there's no such thing as the ether. And even if there were, it was supposed to be a fluid, so you couldn't really make it into crystals unless you somehow got a solid chunk of it. So is there a condensation point for the ether? It's got to be pretty darn cold, because the ether is supposed to be, you know, suffusing all of space, and most of space doesn't really have a whole lot of thermal energy in it. So, how cold could you possibly make it to condense ether? And how do you suspend it over a planet? Does ether have mass? If not, does it interact electrochemically? What does any of this mean? This is just a Jordan word salad. Etheric crystalline lattice that holds up the consciousness dimensionally of the Earth. Yeah, okay, sure.
This grid does have an electromagnetic component associated with the third dimension, but it also...
So we should be able to find it then, right? Like, there should be electromagnetic flux lines going through it somewhere, somehow. Something should be detectable about it. How do you know when you've gone past it? Are you in it? Do these little actual lines have any physical reality? I mean, I don't know.
also has a component for every dimension as well.
Oh.
These grids are geometric, of course, and science will eventually discover that there is a grid for every species in the world.
It would be nice if before we proposed that every species had an etheric crystalline grid in all of the dimensions, that we found any one such etheric crystalline grid unambiguously. That's what I would like to do.
Each of these grids have their own geometry and are unique. There's not another one like it, just as the species itself are unique. These grids give off light as well, and from space they can be seen as the source of the bluish glow around the Earth.
Hold on, guys. You have to give me a second on this one. Oh, man. Okay. Hold on. I have to collect myself. Okay, first, that's not a single photograph. That's a composite image, and that blue glow is significantly less pronounced than actual photographs of the Earth from space. So what you're mostly looking at here is the artist giving you a little bit of an impression. And second, there's this other thing. Look, you know what? I'm gonna put it to chat. Chat. Can you think of anything hazy above the very surface of the Earth that might show up in photographs taken from space? There's this thing. Thing starts with an A. I don't know. Chat, can you help me out? What is it? What is that thing called? Any ideas, chat? It starts with an A, I know it. It's a thing. It's not an etheric crystalline lattice. More of a fluid. Oh, right, the atmosphere. Right. Yeah, it's the air, Jordan. The air isn't a magic crystal ether sphere. It's... Oh, my goodness. That is just amazingly dumb.
What Thoth and friends had to do was create a synthetic Christ consciousness grid, allowing humans to ascend to the Christ consciousness in a very short time.
But I thought when we were starting to do these synthetic things that was the result of the Lucifer experiment, and you should just do things in communion with the oneness of being, and that way you can make your Merkabah of love and Christiness or something. Why do we have to make... Is it making an artificial Christ consciousness grid a bad idea? I don't know. I guess synthetic things are only bad sometimes. It's only bad when the Martians do it.
But first, let's talk about the science behind the grid. Perhaps you've heard of
the science behind the grid. Hold on, everybody.
The 100th monkey experiment. Over a span of 30 years, scientists were researching a species of monkey called Macaca fuscata on an island in Japan. They were providing the monkeys with sweet potatoes by dropping them in the sand. The monkeys liked sweet potatoes, but they didn't like the sand and dirt so much. A few monkey children figured out that they could wash their sweet potatoes, and some of them taught the technique to their parents. Only a few of the adult monkeys did this though. This went on for some time, until one day, the monkeys who actually knew the technique hit critical mass. And bingo! The technique started spreading faster than it did before. Monkeys started learning it really easily across all of the Japanese islands nearby, as well as on the mainland.
Okay, but here's the thing though. Let's take everything so far at face value. Some monkeys learn to wash potatoes. What that means is it's not very hard for monkeys to figure out to wash potatoes. Monkeys are actually fairly smart, and they're not the only animals that have figured out to wash food. So, what experiments were done to demonstrate that this wasn't just independent discovery of washing techniques by various monkey populations? Spoiler alerts, there wasn't any. And, I've heard of this 100th monkey thing. I think I first researched it while looking at a different Jordan video that I was thinking about doing, but it wasn't interesting enough to actually do it. And yeah, there is no 100th monkey effect. It just doesn't exist.
They knew that there had to be something that wasn't yet understood about how a species is connected to itself. So what did we do? We tried it on humans. Our research team made a picture out of human faces. About 100 faces hidden within a single picture, but at first glance, you could only see about 6 or 7. They did several surveys with a few hundred people in Australia and said, alright, find the faces. Most people could only pick out 6, 7, 8, 9 or so, not many more. After that, the research team went to Britain and aired the picture on a closed cable BBC special that was shown only in England. They showed where all of the faces were, every last one. Half of the research team which stayed in Australia did the experiment again with new subjects, and lo and behold, people were just naturally able to see more faces.
Do we have a citation on this? Because here's the thing, that would be interesting if it happened. But does anyone know of this experiment actually happening? Is this a real thing? Like, because the thing is, I've never heard of this particular experiment, so I don't know if it existed. I mean, really, it seems very unlikely because if that had been confirmed, that would be a pretty significant thing. But yeah, I've never heard of anything like that. Oh, hey, Brainbug, welcome. So, okay, I'll tell you what. I'm checking around for an experiment on this, and I'm not seeing anything about an experiment that isn't itself reliant on this video. Because I did find one thing that is about that from a different, from a Facebook page, but it's just Jordan's re-uploaded footage. So, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say that unless I get a really good citation for this, this just didn't happen.
After this experiment, they knew that something definitely connects us all, and the field of noetics is learning more about it daily. It's mass consciousness.
The field of noetics isn't a field. It's just not. There are pseudoscientists who do noetics, and noetics is this idea, it's based on an ancient Greek word, the nous, which is a very hard to translate word, but it has to do with like a cosmic consciousness. It does occur in some areas in Christian theology, especially Eastern Christian churches like the Eastern Orthodox or the Oriental Orthodox, or I'm not sure about the Nestorian churches, but there's this idea that the noetic things are sort of a spiritual realm of consciousness, and that is the primary way in which, say, God or angels exist. But yeah, there's no field of science around it because there's never been any confirmable experimental evidence that things like telepathy or collective consciousness actually exist. So, yeah.
In Lesson 11, I showed you the 3 levels of consciousness. Each of these levels have their own consciousness grids around the planet, and our second level grid is based on squares and triangles. Many governments of the world...
I mean, to be fair, he says he explained it in an earlier episode, and I certainly haven't seen that, so maybe he does. But that didn't make much sense to me.
Especially the Russian and US governments were studying our grids back in the 60s and probably earlier. When mapping out the grid on the planet, you find little military bases on many of the nodal points of the grid. There are tons of these bases way out in the middle of nowhere, like on little islands like Guam.
Yeah, why would there be a military base on Guam? Well, the military base on Guam, if I remember correctly, was established, I think it was in the 40s. I wonder if there was any major military campaign being conducted by the United States in the Pacific Ocean in the 1940s. Huh. It's probably the French and Indian War. That's what I'm going to go with.
This couldn't be a coincidence that these government powers placed their bases right where the little spirals came out of the grid.
You haven't proven that the spirals exist, Jordan. It's entirely more likely that you chose to put your imaginary spirals where there are military bases. Or it could just be that because significant structures like military bases or monuments or whatever are all over the place, that any regular grid that you draw is going to have nodes that meet near some kind of a thing, which you can then attach importance to. Yeah, and there's the question, why is it on many and not all of the nodes? If it's important to put a military base on a node in the grid, what does that get for the military base? Why didn't you put it on all of the nodes? It's not like the United States government, for one, is shy about grabbing land to put a military base on it. Not only do they do it in the US, they do it all over the place.
They were trying to take control of the grid, because if you control consciousness, you control what we think and feel.
Okay, I've been on a military base. They're not chock full of like weird occult ritual centers where you can exert mind control. How is it that physically putting a bunch of soldiers or Marines or whatever on a physical location means that you control the grid? How does that work? Does just having a bunch of guys in a uniform give you control over the grid? why are the people there the ones controlling the grid? How does that mean that the world leaders have control over the grid? We need more than just, oh, they put a military base there. You know what that means? Wink, wink. Mind control somehow.
Of course, there was another organization that had its hand in both of these governments, and still do, and we will discuss them soon enough. This grid...
Who wants to bet it's the Illuminati? Alright, for $5 from Kerry Bronson, we have the Sharpshooter fallacy, like the Texas one. Oh, sorry, the SS Sharpshooter fallacy? I don't know. But the stars are markedly less big and bright and have more aliens. Yeah, it's... Basically, it is sort of the Texas Sharpshooter fallacy. So for those of you who might not know, the Texas Sharpshooter fallacy says that, oh, look, I hit my target. But in fact, what you actually did was you found where you hit and then made that your target. So the classic analogy is a man in Texas takes a 6-shooter and fires at a barn. Then he goes over to the hole and paints a bullseye around it. He says, see, I hit that dead straight on in the bullseye. And so the analogy here is like, if you start with a map of military bases and then you draw lines connecting them, they'll form a neat little pattern. And then you can be like, aha, see, they were built over these nodes on the pattern, when really the pattern was only derived from these significant locations. And it's actually a big part of the whole, like, quote-unquote ley line phenomenon, which I think is similar to this. I'm pretty sure this is related to ley lines, because, I mean, just look at it. It looks like ley lines. And the thing about ley lines is that the idea is they're major monuments or churches and temples and military bases and things like that are built on these lines of energy flow across the earth. But the thing is, if you just start drawing lines between any two significant locations on Earth, there's going to be something that falls between that in many cases, right? Especially if you can draw any two lines or any lines between any two things that you think of as significant. It's sort of like the Bible code, right? If you have enough essentially random noise, and then you're willing to analyze it in any way that you want, in multiple ways, eventually you'll come up with something that looks meaningful, but it isn't. Vandalian 1998 says, Dapper, ask for your money back for this movie. Well, fortunately, I already have my money back, because other than the internet, which is a flat rate anyway, I didn't pay anything for this.
Grid is visible through astral projection as well.
Oh.
13,000 years ago, it began.
You know, that is something that the United States government has investigated, things like astral projection and remote viewing. Their conclusion was, we can't get it to work. There's no evidence that anyone can remote view.
Thoth, Ra, and Aragot were to create a global complex that was able to build a synthetic Christ consciousness grid over a 13,000-year time period. The first thing they did was to fly to a place which is now called the Giza Plateau, but back then it was known as the land of Chem. It was also a rainforest.
No, it wasn't the land of Chem. It was... First, we don't know the vowels, but it ends in a T, Chemet. And there's a reason. It's Egyptian for the black land, which was contrasted with the red land. The black land referred to the dark-colored silt that the Nile washed up, which was how farming in Egypt worked. That silt was nutrient-rich, and they relied on it to grow their crops. The red land was so called because of the reddish color of the stone in the desert. So, yeah.
Back then as well, not desert like it is today.
No, it was a... Okay, so... The area surrounding Egypt was a desert, but the area on the Nile wasn't. And it is true that at the time the pyramids were built, the Nile's course was different, and it went right up to the plateaus. So it's... There was always a narrow strip of lush, fertile land right along the Nile. In fact, you can see it in like satellite pictures. It's actually pretty cool. But I guess it's technically true that the area around the pyramids wasn't a desert when they were built. But the area just beyond it was.
First, they created a grid around the planet fourth-dimensionally, and then began...
Oh, what does it mean to make a fourth-dimensional grid around a three-dimensional object? I don't know.
Construct it in the physical third dimension. They went to the male energetic axis of the Earth and constructed a complex which today is called the Solar Cross.
Wait, what were the items on that? Hold on. I gotta look back
Third
at
dimension.
this.
They went to the male energetic axis of the Earth and constructed a
Okay, so the Sphinx is clearly not on this spiral. And the three pyramids, do we get to size this spiral at any point? Because if we do, then any three objects are going to look like they kind of fit some part of the spiral eventually, right? No matter how you configure them, as long as you're willing to be a bit loosey-goosey with what counts as being on the spiral, since even in Jordan's picture, the least pyramid isn't actually centered on the spiral, then yeah, you can fit any arrangement of any three objects onto this spiral. It's meaningless. It's just more Texas Sharpshooter fallacy. Find three things that are cool. I can put them on a spiral. If you want to, I'm pretty sure you could probably find a way to put them and the Sphinx on the same spiral as long as you're willing to shift around where it goes. It's just complete nonsense. It's pattern seeking, pareidolia, it's the Texas Sharpshooter, all of those things, right? They're all happening here. Jordan sees these cool buildings. There must be a pattern. There's some pareidolia. Then he's willing to use any kind of spiral he wants, any size spiral, just throw a spiral on there, and boom, we got some Texas Sharpshooter fallacy happening. There's nothing significant about this.
Complex which today is called the Solar Cross. These men were six-dimensional beings at that time and were living at a very high level of consciousness, so whatever they thought happened instantly.
Then why didn't they just think humans into being at Christ consciousness right now? Or did you not actually mean that whatever they thought came into being? And if they could just do anything by simply thinking it, and they wanted to show us about this great, cool, golden mean spiral sacred geometry, why didn't they do anything more significant than just putting three pyramids in roughly a line? Like, couldn't you do a whole bunch of pyramids that actually make the spiral? Or couldn't you put Jordan's like sacred flower of life patterns around? Like anything that is more significant than building three things that look like tombs that are kind of in a line. It's just very frustrating because none of this makes sense. It's all just nonsense. But somehow there are people who buy into it, and I don't get it. And the thing is, like, you look at other things that people believe, and at least a lot of times it's internally coherent, right? Like we were mentioning earlier, like Scientology, right? Jordan makes less sense than Scientology. That's because Scientology internally makes some sense. On its own terms, it tends not to be self-contradictory. Now, it fails to live up to its predictions, right? Like, people who have achieved clear don't suddenly never get angry anymore, and people who are on the operating thetan levels have never demonstrated any superpowers, even though they're supposed to. But at least, if you look at it as like a fictional construct, it internally makes some sense. But this stuff is just gibberish, mostly.
It was that simple. According to Thoth, he built the Great Pyramid, not the Egyptian king Cheops. Thoth says that it was built 200 years prior to the pole shift and built very quickly.
So, if it was built prior to the pole shift, because remember, for Jordan, a pole shift isn't the magnetic pole shifting. It's the surface of the Earth flying around like crazy, like a crazy top or something. Why didn't it get thrown off? Because the thing is, what holds the pyramids together is primarily just gravity, right? It's just rocks stacked on rocks. It's not a single solid object. If you had a big enough crane, you could just lift the rocks off individually and essentially disassemble any of the pyramids from like the top down. So why didn't all of these rocks just get flown off into a pile when the entire crust of the Earth started flailing about like a fish on land? The only thing I can think of is that Jordan thinks that momentum is not a real thing. That's the only conclusion I can come to. Jordan doesn't believe in momentum. He thinks that's crazy talk. Momentum is for other people.
Pyramids were aligned precisely with both Fibonacci and golden mean spirals emanating from out of the solar cross.
But no, they're not. That's only the case because you chose to make it the case, Jordan. The solar cross doesn't actually occur anywhere on the plateau. This spiral doesn't occur anywhere on the plateau. You just fit your solar cross and your spiral to fit your idea. The Sphinx isn't even on it. Sorry. It's just very frustrating how obvious the sharpshooter fallacy is here, and how oblivious Jordan seems to that fact, and how he's just gonna be, you know what, I'm just going with it.
Interestingly enough, Edgar Cayce also channeled that the pyramids were constructed in this time.
Interestingly enough, someone who channeled that the pyramid channeled before Drunvalo Melchizedek channeled that they were built at this time, also channeled they were built at this time. No. Jordan, what that is evidence of possible dependence, right? How do you know Drunvalo Melchizedek, who runs in these New Age conspiracy theory circles already, didn't read the works of Cayce, who was kind of the founder of a lot of these New Age conspiracy theories? I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think he probably did. And I think that whether consciously or subconsciously, Drunvalo Melchizedek made his quote-unquote revelations compatible with the earlier publicly available Cayce revelations. It's not surprising that someone who came decades later had ideas that were similar to another guy that had some ideas similar to his. That's just how humans work, right? It's like someone tomorrow tells you the story of Star Wars and changes some of the names. Do you think that what that means is that both George Lucas and this guy actually channeled the spirits of long-dead Jedi from a galaxy far, far away? Or do you think maybe George Lucas made up Star Wars, this guy watched it, changed a few details, and then pretended it was his own story? I mean, it's pretty basic Occam's razor, right? We don't need crazy ancient alien spirit Nakals or whatever. We can just have this thing called literary dependence.
The pyramids were also found to be built from the top down.
No, they weren't. They just weren't. While we don't have great records of the building of the pyramids themselves, we have lots of records of how Egyptians built things. And just like everyone else in the history of the entire world, they built things the only possible way, bottom up.
The stones on top were placed first, which has baffled researchers ever since.
No, it hasn't baffled researchers because no legitimate researchers believe this. Like, you don't have Egyptologists going around about how, oh yeah, the pyramids, they were totally built top down. Yeah. How would you even tell? Like, honestly, what would it look like if the pyramids were built top down as opposed to being built bottom up? I don't even know. So it's not going to baffle researchers because there's no reason to think that it did happen. There'd be no real way to test or falsify the hypothesis in the first place. There's good reason to think it didn't happen. So yeah, no, it doesn't baffle anyone except the crazy people who think Jordan has anything worthwhile to say. And for $4.99 US, Vandali 1998 says, so did Jordan take every mythology and combine them together? Yeah, basically. Yep. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but basically what Jordan likes to do is he casts as wide a net as possible. And I think that the reason he does this is because this means that almost anyone in the world has a chance of having heard of the things that he's talking about. And that is like, they're into the Jordan craziness. So, well, so it's true, he hasn't done much Norse or Australian stuff, but I'm going to suspect that Jordan is going to get into that eventually. Because I think, one of the reasons I think he's doing a lot of Hebrew, ancient Greek, and Egyptian stuff is because that's the stuff that we have some of the earliest written records for. And I think that, as Jordan gets farther ahead in time, he's going to start connecting in things that we have only later records of. Because you're going to remember, like, we have only very, very late, in terms of, the broad, sweep of human history, records for, say, Aboriginal mythology or Norse mythology. Aboriginal Australia.
Every time more is learned about the pyramids, we move further into dark on understanding how they were formed.
No, that's not true. So, At first, it was a complete mystery, but then we uncovered things like the village near the pyramids where the workers lived, and so we learned that it was made probably not by slaves, but generally by well-provisioned, probably well-paid free craftsmen who were basically doing this as sort of like a government job. Then we found art depicting how Egyptians generally constructed things. They used sledges that were either human or later on animal drawn. At this point, they probably would have been human drawn. They sometimes would lubricate under the sledge with bits of water. They would float big rocks down the river if they needed to go from a faraway quarry. We've since found things like internal ramps in the pyramids that would allow people to smoothly move rocks up into place the whole time. And yeah, there are still things that we don't know about the construction of the pyramids, but they're not some ever-deepening mystery.
If what Thoth says is true, well, that explains everything.
No, it explains literally nothing. Because all you've done is say, oh, some Atlantean king magicked the pyramids into existence. That doesn't help at all. How did he do it? Could we repeat this technique? Could he show up? Apparently, Drunvalo Melchizedek now knows everything that Thoth knew. So could we get Drunvalo Melchizedek to make a new pyramid to show us how it's done? Maybe he could continue the golden mean spiral and actually make it a real golden mean spiral. How about that?
From there, Thoth and friends constructed an entire network of temples and structures along this grid fourth dimensionally, placing them on nodes on the new synthetic Christ consciousness grid they were creating. All of them were made with Fibonacci or golden mean spirals, and all of them were mathematically referred back to the Solar Cross in Egypt through the Great Pyramid.
Again, it's just citation needed. Are you going to show us a map of these locations? Are you going to show us that they all conform to exactly the same spiral, or are you just going to fit whatever spiral you can to the various ones? He hasn't so far even tried to fit a golden mean spiral onto other locations. Like, you don't get to just say these things and then walk away from the statement. You have to actually demonstrate it. So, yeah. I'll also point out that he keeps showing this picture, which actually shows the 2 least pyramids, in addition to the 3 great pyramids. But he doesn't bother putting them on his map of the spiral. Maybe because they don't fit the spiral.
The creation of all of the sacred sites on the planet were no accident. It was a
Of course they weren't an accident. People wanted sacred sites. I mean, that's all it is. And then if you draw lines between all of them, congrats, you've drawn lines between the sacred sites.
single consciousness that created them all, from Machu Picchu to Stonehenge to Zaghuan, you name it. There are a few exceptions, but most were created by a single awareness as part of a unity consciousness grid.
I like how this grid is basically just made up by Jordan so he can go wherever he wants it to. And even he is like, not everything fits the grid. Like, you could just draw it so it does. It's your made-up grid anyway.
Although the Great Pyramid was done all at once, many of these ancient structures of the world were made fourth dimensionally and slowly dropped in frequency until they manifested on the third dimension over a long period of time.
What? Couldn't we have at least one example of an ancient structure that couldn't actually be made with ancient technology? If we're manifesting these out of the fourth dimensional Christ consciousness omnipotent magic, where you can, anything you think happens, right? How about you drop down a pyramid that isn't just built from bottom down, it's entirely one solid piece of, I don't know, gold. It's a solid hunk of gold, encased in solid steel to protect it. And the whole thing has no seams whatsoever, no tool marks. What? Why is it that all of these structures are made of stone, bits of stone that are human movable and all have tool marks on them? Why is that? Honestly, it's a really good question. Because the thing is, if we found sacred sites that couldn't be built by humans, either at the time or now, that would be pretty good evidence that something weird is going on, something significant. But no. Thoth and company are just magicking into existence temples and sacred sites that could have just been made by any old humans with enough drive, and we have from Vandalia 1998 for 199, a single awareness. The Borg did this. Possibly. But yeah, it's very frustrating because all of these things have indications that humans made them. In some cases, we know where the quarries were for the stones, and we even have, in many cases, blocks of stone that either shattered or cracked during their excavation, so they were abandoned, or that were doing just fine, but that weren't actually needed, and so they just weren't finally snapped away from the underlying rock. And we find that stuff all over the place. You can find it in South America, you can find it in Africa, you can find it in Asia. Everywhere where these big stone objects are made, you can find ones that never got finished. In fact, you can even find it for the Moai in Easter Island. You know, the statues with the big heads? Some people think of them as just the heads, but that's just because many of them, the soil around them has essentially built up after eroding down from the mountains and essentially buried them. But there are unfinished Moai on Easter Island. None of this was just magically poofed into existence. We have the quarries. In some cases, we also even have finished blocks that just weren't used.
Richard Hoagland's research brings this forward, but he wasn't the first either. They showed how one sacred site is extrapolated from another to another to another.
Yeah, look, if you draw a bunch of arbitrary lines and circles, you can connect things. Great. But look, they're even cherry-picking which sites to use. There's a whole lot more cathedrals and ancient sites and henges and all of these things all over the place. And look, many of these things only have 2 points to connect them. Maybe 3 in some cases. Like, we've only got 2 points, St. Michel's Island and that Chartres, France. Okay, you drew a circle in which both of those were on it. And then you drew a line through it to Sintra, and then you drew a few more lines. Like, this is just nonsense. It's just a whole bunch of Texas Sharpshooter.
A hot topic of discussion right now are ley lines. These are,
like I said, ley lines. They're completely meaningless.
simply geometric relations between sacred sites. Archaeologists are now finding these huge connections between major spiritual sites in the globe, and now we know why they're connected.
Yeah, they're connected because if you draw enough lines, eventually some of them are going to pass over more than 2 objects that you think are of significance, and then you're going to keep those lines. That's all it is. There's nothing else going on here.
These sites had to be built physically so that the Christ consciousness grid could manifest. In a way, think of the physical sites as the wiring of a giant wireless electrical system, and then it needs about 13,000 years of continuous energy flow for it to actually turn on.
Okay, so one question I have about this is if all these sacred sites are being poofed magically into existence by the same 3 dudes, then why aren't there no more than 3 different styles, right? If these are carefully engineered power grids to turn on the etheric crystal matrix from the upper dimensions, why aren't they similar? You're like, oh, lots of them have pyramids. Okay, well, first, the pyramids aren't very similar. Many of them are stepped, some of them are smooth-sided, some of them have a bit of a combination of both, like Mesoamerican pyramids where they had pretty smooth stairs, but around that was stepped pyramids. Some of them have ritual centers at the top, some of them don't. Some of these things aren't even pyramids in the first place. Some of the things that are quote-unquote pyramids, like many of the temples in like Southeast Asia, are actually just decorative bits that don't have any real internal structure and aren't buildings unto themselves. So can anything be a conduit for the grid? Like any old building? Doesn't apparently have to be pyramids. It doesn't have to be a particular shape. Why not just put houses down there? Is the house I'm in right now capable of projecting energy into the etheric crystal dimension grid? If not, why not? Because it wasn't magicked into place? Maybe.
And just so that you're not left in suspense, yes, the grid was completed.
Yay!
It came to life and is now active, though not really used. Congratulations, Earth. We actually survived.
So, if that's the case, then we should all be at Christ consciousness. Because the initial setup for the story was, if the human species doesn't reach Christ consciousness in 13,000 years, something, apparently we go extinct. I don't know why. But apparently, we made it. We're not extinct. Therefore, we're all at Christ consciousness. But I gotta be honest, it doesn't seem like Jordan thinks we're all at Christ consciousness, because he keeps talking about Christ consciousness as if it's something that you need to, attain. You need to look for it. It hasn't happened for everyone yet. But he's also saying that there are all these ancient people who had Christ consciousness. So some people having Christ consciousness isn't the same thing as the species as a whole having Christ consciousness. We don't seem to have Christ consciousness now, so why did we survive? Is the grid a replacement for Christ consciousness? Because earlier it was supposed to be a tool to get to Christ consciousness. See? It's still just nonsense.
Not only has Thoth told us this in person, but he's also written it down in the Emerald Tablets. These tablets were left in the Great Pyramid thousands of years ago.
Except we don't actually have Emerald Tablets. We have the writings of Drumvalo Melchizedek, which, spoiler, aren't on tablets made of emerald. It's just paper.
There are 12 tablets in total, formed from a substance created through alchemical transmutation. They are imperishable, resistant to all elements and corrosion. Their atomic structure is fixed in place, and no change can ever take place.
I mean, all of that is really cool, but do you have a sample? Can we go find one emerald tablet to show that any of this is the case, right? Because otherwise, you're just making up all sorts of really cool properties that, whatever. It's like describing the alien from Aliens, right? It's cool within the story, but if I tell you, oh, there's a creature with blood that's such a strong acid it can eat through, miles of metal, and it goes through anything that it touches, no matter what it is, and the only thing that can protect it, that can be, protection against this acid is the alien's own physical body, and they can burst out of your chest, and all of this. That's great, right? But if it isn't real, if I don't have an example of this thing, no one should take me seriously as this is a claim about reality that really exists, right? Especially when it's a physical object. If you were like, oh, there are these spiritual writings that exist in the fourth dimension that can be transmitted, then I'd be like, well, at least it's a maybe, because I don't know how to assess that claim. But these apparently physically exist, but we don't have any copies of it. So right now we're in the same situation as the golden plates from the Book of Mormon. Until you produce one, there's very good reason to think that they don't exist.
In that respect, they violate the material laws of ionization.
What? Ionization? Is Jordan just grabbing random sciencey words? The laws of ionization. Okay, Jordan, sure.
These tablets share a great wisdom, and you can read them at over 100 different levels of consciousness, and you will always understand them differently.
How many levels of consciousness are there? Because so far I haven't heard much more than 6. So does that mean that even though Thoth is at the point where he's omnipotent, one of the things he can't do is read the tablets at the highest level of consciousness?
If you're interested in this stuff, you should definitely consider reading.
So Silver Harlow says, how do you get a sample of an indestructible object? You just have one of them. The whole thing just counts as your sample now. So what I would expect to see is at least one of these emerald tablets somewhere in the world actually being tested.
Reading them. As you can probably tell, Thoth plays a pretty large role in what happened. Most of this information comes from him. Thoth also
Allegedly. It comes from someone channeling him.
Provided most of this information about the flower of life and its geometric relationship to consciousness with us.
But there's no obvious connection between the flower of life and consciousness. It's just a bunch of circles that make a pretty pattern. What significance is there to it? Now, I know he probably tried to describe this in an earlier video or something, but that really is all it is. If you take enough cool shapes and arrange them in funny, regular patterns, you get more cool shapes. But that's just a logical consequence of geometry. How do we know that's significant? We don't. So the Heathen Wizard says the Emerald Tablet is a late antique hermetical text. It's not written on emerald. So I don't know if that's the case. I'm willing to take your word for it at this point. But that's one of the things about Jordan is he'll take real things and then make crazy versions of them. Or in this case, maybe Drunvalo Melchizedek, a name I apparently have trouble saying, is doing that. And yeah, I would not be surprised at all if either Jordan or Drunvalo Melchizedek heard about a Hermetic text, which, by the way, in case people don't know, Hermeticism is it's sort of a loose affiliation of religious movements centered in late antiquity Egypt. So this is sort of like around the time that Christianity is spreading through the Middle East and Europe, and it still really hasn't replaced a lot of other religious movements. And in this time, there's a syncretic group called the Hermeticists that start writing various texts focusing on a character that is a sort of hybrid between Hermes from the Greek mythology and Thoth from Egyptian mythology. And you can't really get a sense of like a real biography for this character, but he has interactions with certain stock characters either the stock characters reveal some wisdom to him, or much more commonly, he reveals some wisdom to the stock characters through things like dialogues and stories. And anyway, yeah, I don't need to get into a whole big thing on Hermeticism because, first of all, I don't know all that much about Hermeticism, but that's just a basic overview of the kind of thing that we're talking about there.
And this stuff is tied intimately to the geometry of the universe. Considering the quality and quantity of information that he has shared, it makes you really start considering that this next part can be true.
Okay, quantity? Yeah. Drunvalo Melchizedek has written a lot. Quality, however, I've yet to see anything that's actually, one, significant and verifiable, and then verified. That's it. It's all either trivial, or non-verifiable, or verifiable, but not actually then having been verified, instead being contradicted. So the quality is really, really low.
The Great Pyramid has a legendary missing capstone. According to the Emerald Tablets, deep under the Great Pyramid there's a room called the Hall of Records. This room was not built by Thoth and long predates the Atlantean civilization.
Then where is it? Like, seriously, we have technology to scan for underground voids, right? We have, like, seismometers and all sorts of ground-penetrating radar and stuff like that. It shouldn't be a question as to whether or not this exists.
Within the Hall of Records is the capstone of the pyramid, which is 5.5 inches high, solid gold, and completely holographic image of the Great Pyramid.
It's either solid gold, or it's a holographic image of the pyramid. Solid gold isn't a hologram. You can't put a hologram inside of solid gold because a hologram is just light that is basically acting as if it were cast by an object that isn't really there. There are ways to make holograms, right? They're essentially cool physical optical illusions, but you can't put them inside of solid objects that are impenetrable to light in the first place. It's literal nonsense to say that something is a solid gold hologram. You can have a hologram of solid gold. You could have a golden colored hologram. But if you have a chunk of gold, you can't make it into a hologram that is still the solid piece of gold, nor can you project a hologram into it. My goodness. And yes, there was a capstone made of gold on top of the Great Pyramid, and no one knows where it is. Come on, hit play.
It has all of the little rooms and everything. However, this leaves us with a 24 square foot piece of the Great Pyramid that's missing. If what Thoth says is true, that missing piece actually belongs to a very special airship that exists on Earth. And the way to the airship is through the Sphinx.
What? So, the pyramid went bunch of rock, airship, then somehow solid gold hologram. And so the solid gold hologram was on top of the airship, which is not a great way to build an airship, by the way. Normally you want airships to be sort of the highest part of anything, But now the airship is under the Sphinx in a different room, I suppose, than the Hall of Records. So now we have two different secret areas that no one has been able to find.
The Sphinx, according
Weren't the caps made of electrum? Which they might have been. I might be incorrect about the gold. It might have been electrum. I also don't think they were solid. I'm pretty sure they were like a capstone that, there's a capstone and then you put metal over it. But I would double check me on that one. I'm not super confident on all of my pyramid architecture.
to Thoth, is not 12,000 years old, but dates back over 5.5 million years on Earth. Deep under the Sphinx,
I would like a citation on that one too, but I know it's just going to be Dream below Melchizedek.
about 1 mile down, is a round room with a flat floor and flat ceiling.
Okay.
Inside this room is the oldest synthetic object on Earth.
Whoa.
The object is about 2 city blocks in size. It's round like a disc and has a flat bottom and top. It is also only about 3 atoms thick, except for a pattern on the top and bottom which looks like this. This pattern is 5 atoms thick. Thoth says that it's powered by consciousness, thoughts, and feelings, and connects with your own living Merkabah, which means that it becomes an extension of you and your own energy fields. The ship is also intimately connected with the spirit of the Earth, and is the protector for the whole planet.
I do like the Legend of Zelda art here. But so here's the thing, just like with all of this, you can't just assert that this is a thing and then give it all sorts of cool attributes. You actually need to produce something. Produce the airship. Anyone can say anything about whatever is mysteriously under the Sphinx, right? Yeah, it's 3 atoms thick. I mean, I'm just willing to accept it because he's just making up attributes, right? I'm going to say that 5 miles under the Angkor Wat in Thailand, that there's an even bigger room with an even bigger disk that's even thinner. It's only 1 atom thick, except for the pattern that looks like a portrait of Dapper Dino. That's 3 atoms thick. And it can combine with your Merkabah and times 2. And then it's not just the protector of the Earth, it's the protector of the whole galaxy. And it's not just 5 million years old, it's 12 million years old. And it was put here by the ancient 45th dimensional Odin. See, it doesn't matter. I can just make this up. That's great. I can even say that I channeled it. Oh, it wasn't me who made this up. Thor told me. I channeled Thor. He told me that Odin put a 1 atom thick disc under Angkor Wat. Yep, that's what happened. Okay, great.
Thoth built the pyramid the way he did to fit with the ship. When on top of the Great Pyramid, it creates this image from above. The disc ship has a circumference equal to the perimeter of the Great Pyramid.
But that's because you chose to make it that way. You didn't find a disc and then find that it had these mathematical relationships, right? Unless you actually have the physical disc, you saying that it has a significant diameter doesn't mean anything.
As we discussed in Lesson 11, whenever that ratio appears, life occurs. This ship can only be used by the purest of souls.
Wherever a certain ratio appears, life occurs. So, if I cut paper to a certain ratio, is it going to just come alive? Oh no, it's the disc itself is supposed to only be 3 atoms thick. That's definitely what he's going with here. I don't even know what it means for life to appear when a ratio occurs. A ratio is literally just one number divided by a different number. It doesn't cause life. Life is a chemical process. It's not caused by ratios.
See, whenever we approach the point in the precession of the equinox where our poles do these shifts, we become very vulnerable.
Okay, I don't know if this was a thing before, but pole shifts, which are real, the magnetic pole reversals, right? Those aren't correlated with the precession of the equinox. There's no correlation there. It's not like pole shifts occur every 26,000 years. Because the thing is, by tracing through the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, we have a pretty good record of pole reversals for the last few tens of millions of years. They do not happen every 26,000 years, or even close to it. They are pretty uneven in terms of like periodicity, but they usually have much longer cycles than 26,000 years. Yeah, I think you meant 24 feet in diameter. Oh, and uh, Peter, I don't know atoms of which element. That's a good question, right? Because like if they're 3 uranium atoms thick, that's a pretty different thing than 3 hydrogen atoms thick. So yeah,
Things often degenerate, and while things become chaotic, there are often other species who wish to take us over. This has always happened, not just with us, but with all evolving consciousness.
so now we have alien invaders from places other than Mars, presumably, because this alien invader isn't red. So that, this is getting interesting now. We're getting space invaders.
Every time a takeover seems imminent, a very pure person will find their way to the ship and raise it into the air. The Earth and Sun will connect with that person and give him or her great power. Then, whatever that person thinks and feels will happen. And think
Has this occurred before? When? Where? Who was the person? Who saw him or her?
about it. If consciousness is the primary core component of the entire planet,
Which it's not. The primary core component of the planet is iron, because that's what's in the core. Yeah.
does it not make sense that it would have its own defense mechanism?
I don't know, because I don't know what it means for a planet to be made of consciousness. So would it have a defense mechanism? I don't know, because is it vulnerable to something? What is it vulnerable to? Apparently it's vulnerable to alien invasion, but the planet's going to be vulnerable to that no matter if it's made of consciousness or if it's actually, like it is, made mostly of like silicates and iron. So I have no idea. And Mine Onion, I have no idea why we don't have records of this. But apparently we do, though. The channeled records from Droom Below Melchizedek. No, we don't have actual verifiably ancient records. No. We just have to take Droom Below Melchizedek's word for it.
This defense is an airship that plugs into the Earth and the Sun, allowing the Earth to have protection.
But then what does it do? So we have aliens coming in, presumably what, on spaceships? Does the airship stop the spaceships? Does it repel them? Does it blow them up? Does it shoot laser beams out of it? What does it do?
Our takeover event actually already happened, the same year the
Okay, so Dreadland Worm, the way I'm interpreting it is that it has a diameter of 24 feet, and then the thickness of the cylinder from top to bottom is whatever atoms they are 3 atoms thick.
Christ grid was activated. The year was 1989, and we were having some troubles with the Greys, a race of ETs who were slowly plotting takeover due to a previous scuffle we were having.
So, in 1989, the Greys were trying to take over, and apparently that has something to do with the Tiananmen Square guy. Okay. So presumably in 1989, someone went to Egypt, hopped on the airship, rose out from under the Sphinx, connected to the sun, and drove back the Greys. And no one noticed this, even though Gaza is a pretty populous city that's pretty lively and that has a lot of tourists in addition to the actual locals. Sure. Yeah, that's probably true.
A very pure woman in Peru made the ascension process into the Christ consciousness grid and found the ship. She tuned it to the
Who? What's her name? Who are her friends? Who's her family?
frequency of the fourth dimension, where she raised it through the Earth and into the air, and manifested a situation for the Greys to leave.
Was she invisible this whole time? What does it mean that she manifested a situation that made the Greys leave? Did she make the Earth really stinky for the Greys? What? This doesn't mean anything. It's just a bunch of words that don't turn into coherent thoughts, and that's very annoying to me.
Within a very short time, the Greys began getting sick, and remained sick for as long as they stayed here.
Well, I mean, at least that's like actually a reason for someone to leave, is because it's making you sick there. So I withdraw one of my criticisms.
They have been forced to leave for now, and we are once again safe. The ship is a warship in that whatever race is trying to take over, the person will just think them away, think up a situation, and force them to leave.
Well, just think. So why don't you just think up that they're all just never existed? Now you never have to worry about them ever again. Just think up that situation. Nope, let's give them tummy aches. That's a better idea. German Furman says her name was Mary Sue and she asked nicely.
Returning to the events on Atlantis, after completing the complex in Egypt, Thoth and pals returned to Atlantis where they waited for about 200 years until that critical point on the precession of the equinox where the poles would shift. They knew that...
Again, there hasn't been a magnetic field reversal during this time. And the Earth's crust certainly has never flown around randomly.
Atlantis would sink and they would be ready.
Previously on Thoth and Pals.
Oh,
Thoth,
goodness,
the poles are
that's
shifting.
horrible.
Oh, the pole shift? Yeah, whoa, what's wrong with your eyes? I don't know. When Thoth first saw signs of the polar shift, they
I officially hate this. This is awful.
returned to the land of Chem and raised the warship into the sky. They went to Atlantis and picked up the Nacals.
Wait, is that them getting into the airship that's 3 atoms tall? Okay.
The Nacals weren't just passengers though, and each and every being was working in unity to create a very powerful Merkabah around themselves and the ship.
Oh, I think those carrot noses, Kia no, by the way, are actually supposed to be beaks. Seriously, yeah, 2d6 cringe damage. My goodness. I'm gonna have to stop pretty soon, because I don't think I can do much more of this. This is turning my brain into mush.
They returned to the Great Pyramid and landed the ship on top, forming the phi ratio with the pyramid.
Yay!
And then, it happened. The poles began to shift, and human consciousness
And they were immediately flung off of the pyramid, which crumbled into a bunch of disassociated rocks. Got it.
began to plummet. Simultaneously, the electromagnetic and magnetic fields of the Earth collapsed, and all life on the planet went into the Great Void, the 3.5 days of absolute blackness described by many ancient cultures in the world.
But that isn't a thing. There aren't lots of stories about 3.5 days of darkness. That's not a real thing that exists. That's not it. There is no such thing.
The Emerald Tablets say that whenever we go through a polar shift, we go through a void space as we change our frequencies for about 3.5 days.
Our frequencies of what? What is it that has this frequency? People don't just have a frequency, right? A frequency is how often something happens. So your monitor refresh that you're on the screen you're watching this on has a refresh rate. So it has a frequency. Light has a wavelength and a certain speed, so it has a frequency, right? High energy light has a higher frequency than low energy light. So say blue light has a higher energy and therefore higher frequency than red light. But people don't just have a frequency. Frequencies are associated with repeating physical phenomena. So I don't know what this means, but okay.
This is also in the Troano document, depicted by 3.5 stones painted black. This refers to a time when we go through what
I don't know what the Troano document is. If anyone does, let me know.
science calls the electromagnetic null zone. During the pole shift, a phenomenon takes place where everything just seems to disappear for a certain time. Usually it's between 2 to 4 days, and the last time it was 3.5 days. Here's where it gets interesting. What happens to us does not usually happen to a normal species, because most advanced species will have their Merkabahs handy at the time of the shift.
Oh, good for them. You don't want to be caught during a pole shift without your Merkabah. Oh, my goodness. That'd be like showing up to class without pants on.
We didn't, due to our little crisis, and we got sucked into the void space without protection.
Oh no!
This resulted in us losing our memories. Science realizes that all of our memories
Wait, does that include Thoth? How does anyone know any of this? Whatever, who cares?
are connected through cells in our brains as well as fields around our heads. What is not entirely understood by science yet, at least not directly, is the connection our memories have with the planet itself. We've discussed this before. The magnetics of the Earth affect how we think and act. The Merkabah is an electromagnetic field that you create around your body that can serve as protection from void as you're consciously going through it.
Okay, so the void is kept out by electromagnetic spinny pyramids. So apparently the void is an electromagnetic phenomenon. So apparently magnets can erase your memory. I'm not sure how anyone manages to get like a CT or an MRI scan, what I meant to say, without having amnesia, but apparently they do. So I would love it if at some point, Jordan's never going to watch this, and even if he does, he's not going to respond. But if he did, what I would love to know is how I could simulate the void with magnets. And then maybe we can do the experiment not on a human, but like, maybe we have an animal that we've taught some tricks to. And we put it through our magnetic memory wiper, and if it has forgotten the tricks, then hey, maybe the void as an electromagnetic memory wiper is a reasonable thing. Sure. Although I will point out that light is an electromagnetic phenomenon, so why is the void black if it's full of electromagnetic radiation? I guess none of it could be in the visible spectrum, but that seems a little unlikely that it just happens to avoid that part of the EM frequency.
What happened to us when we didn't have that protection? It was a clean wipe. When we existed on Atlantis, we were living at a very high level of consciousness in a higher dimension.
So humans were in the fourth dimension, which, by the way, according to Jordan, is the dimension that the reptoids come from. So better watch out if you're in that fourth dimension.
We had extremely advanced and sophisticated bodies and minds, and were capable of practically anything, living in a dimension where molecules were spaced so far apart that consciousness could interact with them without physically moving.
Okay, so your consciousness can interact better with more spaced out atoms. So how high do I have to go before the air is thin enough for me to use airbending? That's what I want to know. Because if it is actually true that just physically separating atoms is what makes them susceptible to conscious manipulation, at a certain height, I should be able to do Avatar The Last Airbender stuff. So what's that height? Kids Good Cell says, why doesn't my CGI dinosaur have lip covering? So the actual honest answer is because I had already gotten to the point where I was like 3 months into making it, and I just kind of wanted to finish. That's honestly it. There are aspects of my dinosaur avatar which are just there because I can't prove that they're inaccurate, and I just wanted to actually finally have it done. Because I did make it from scratch. This avatar started as a literal cube in Blender, and it took months. And eventually I just was like, I need to actually just have my avatar up on the channel. Because I originally had an earlier Ceratosaurus avatar that was simpler, but it was lost in a pretty bad computer accident. And then I was using for a little while an Allosaurus that I just bought. And during that time I was working on the Ceratosaurus, and eventually I was just like, no, I just had to finish. And one of the things that I didn't do was check into all of the documentation on coverings for like lips and whether or not there was any connection, like basically osteological correlates for, say, like a lizard-like lip or anything like that. So it's mostly just me getting tired of trying to tweak it. So why does my CGI dinosaur have no hat is also a good question. There are two reasons for this. One is my primary use for this stage is top hats off use. So this is mostly going to be for when I decide to stream a game on top hats off. And for that reason, I took the top hat off. The other reason is because I wanted to have the avatar moving in front of the screen, but with the top hat on there, it took up way too much of the area where I'm actually streaming whatever is on screen. And I didn't want it to interrupt that much. So that's the other big reason.
It's hard to explain because you can literally shape your environment immediately through your consciousness in these higher frequencies.
You just explained it. How was that hard to explain? That's one of the only things that, Jordan, you've ever tried to explain in this entire series that wasn't hard to explain. Sure. But again, at what altitude does this work? Because I want to do some airbender stuff.
In that sense, we were creators, knowing and understanding oneness, beings of love. But then we fell. We dropped back down to this place called the third dimension. We also fell in consciousness back to zero. We forgot how to use the pineal gland, and it slowly shrunk to the size it is now, like a raisin.
Your pineal gland is what it sounds like. It's a gland. It puts out hormones that helps regulate various aspects of your biology. You can't use it any more than you already are for most people. I mean, granted, there might be some people who have, pathologically over or underactive pineal glands, but the pineal gland is not a magical thing that gives you superpowers. I know. There's a movie starring, what's his name? The guy who played Brunt and Wei Yun. Bent, you know who that is. Anyway, he also played Shran in. I'm just naming Star Trek roles. Jeffrey Combs, yeah. This is Jeffrey Combs movie where his pineal gland pokes through his forehead as he's being really gross. But that's fake news. That isn't a real thing. The pineal gland isn't magical. It's not the seat of your consciousness. It is homologous to, structures that in other organisms, other tetrapods, are associated with regulating the circadian rhythm. So, for instance, most lizards have what's called a parietal foramen, where they have a little opening in the top of their skull that is usually covered by a single largish scale that allows some light through, and their pineal gland is exposed to that light, and it helps them regulate their day-night cycle, basically. But yeah, that's not a thing in humans. Or mammals generally.
Where it's supposed to be...
Yes, Jeffrey Combs, and Vishanti is right. Shran is the best. Although, I am still a big fan of Brunt of the FCA. Inspector Brunt. I can't not give him his proper title.
Eyeball size. When this happened, we forgot how to breathe source energy into our bodies, and our lifespans went kaput.
Source energy? How do you... Oh, we forgot, so of course I don't know how you breathe source energy. But I would like to know what source energy is. Apparently you can breathe it, so it's part of the atmosphere. So that's interesting.
Eventually, we went from 900 years to what it is today. We had not experienced this dense reality that we had before, at least for a very long time. We were kind of like a supercomputer that gets completely wiped, no operating system or anything. We had these advanced physical bodies, but we didn't know how to use them.
What's advanced about the human body? I mean, it's pretty good at tool use and distance running, but that's about it. It's not particularly strong. It's not very fast in a sprint. It's not very dangerous. It doesn't have any, sharp claws or fangs or anything. It's better at water retention than most other mammals, but it's not as good as most birds or lizards. It's got pretty decent, it's a pretty good vision overall, but crap sense of smell, iffy hearing. I mean, I don't know why the human body is supposed to be some kind of peak of physical perfection.
This is why today we are so physically advanced compared to pretty much all the other animals in this third dimension.
I would like you to pick a fight with pretty much anything on there. I'm going to guess that you're going to lose. So, let's see what we have. Rhino, you're definitely going to lose in a fight to a rhino. I think that's a doe. I don't think you could beat up a doe. Then we've got some kind of large horned bovid. Yeah, you're going to die. But what looks like a tiger shark. Yep, that would kill you. We've got a hippo. Yep, that would kill you. I think that's a boar. Those kill people all the time. Goats. You're probably not going to win a fight against a goat. Then we have, I guess, a different shark. You're probably going to lose that. Let's see. A small monkey. That you might be able to defeat. Maybe. Giraffe? Nope, you'd lose a fight to a giraffe. You'd also lose a fight to an elephant. There's a different shark. Oh, I guess we get the skate. I'll be generous and assume that it's a skate with no stinger. Yes, you could probably beat that up. Then we have a different shark. You'd probably lose. We just have a few, random teleost fish. Yeah, you could probably win a fight against that. Kangaroo? People do lose fights to kangaroos. Let's see. We have what looks like a emu. Yep, those can disembowel you. Oh, now we have an Indian elephant, whereas before we had an African elephant. Again, still, you're going to lose. Jordan's hand is covering up whatever that is, so I just won't count it. Zebra, you would lose in a fight to a zebra. That looks like a penguin. You could probably beat up a small penguin. It looks like we have another small deer. You could probably win against that. And we have a different rhino. You would lose. So I'm not sure why humans are physically better, because I can just pick a category, and then these animals win. So for instance, with that monkey, I bet humans would lose in a climbing contest to that monkey. with those fish, I bet humans would lose in a swimming contest or a staying underwater contest. What is it about the human form that's physically superior?
For a time, the survivors of the Atlantean fall, and there were a few, were literally hairy barbarians. We even had to rediscover fire.
Humans have been using fire for millions of years, right? The use of fire by hominins predates Homo sapiens by a long time. It's one of the reasons that modern humans, have evolved to eat cooked food. It's because humans have been evolving alongside the use of fire for millions of years. So, no, there was no time thousands of years ago when humans didn't have fire. Now, there is potentially one group of humans, and maybe a few more left now, that don't currently have reliable access to fire. But even that is iffy, and we know that humans have, in many cases, been using fire for much, much longer. Wait. Keano says 8% of Americans think they can win a bear fist fight against an elephant? You have a source for that? That is pretty great. I would love to see any of those people actually try to fight an elephant, except I don't think it would be fair to the elephant to just randomly have people attack it, but that would be awesome. That's pretty hilarious. And actually, given that it's Americans, I might actually believe that. No offense, Americans, but there's some... The American education system has failed a lot of people. Let's just say that. Well, yeah, to be fair, elephants don't exactly have fists. That's true. Oh, it is the same video Vosh covered? I don't know. I actually haven't really seen a lot about is it Vosh? Vosh? I don't know. Vosh content. I'm gonna go with that. But anyway, this has been going for about 2 hours, a little bit more. So we're gonna start winding down now. I want to give a little bit of channel news, upcoming stuff. So Tuesday is going to be an Eric with Erica. So Gutsit Gibbon is going to be on the channel. If you don't know who Gutsit Gibbon is, she does a lot of biology, evolution, paleoanthropology, and creationist busting content. She has an excellent channel. It is one of the recommended channels if you are on my channel page. So go subscribe to her. So right now the plan is she's going to be here for Eric with Erica, where we're going to take a look at an Eric Hovind video about human evolution. Then Thursday should be the next International Phonetic Alphabet video, where I go over the vowel chart as well as some of the diacriticals. Let's see. Also from Vandalia 1998 for $4.99 US. Thanks for the laugh, Stepper. Hope you can make it to my live chat with RJ and Jackson at 9 EDT tonight. I think I can, but I'm not sure. There has been some stuff going on IRL that just came up very recently that I'm not sure to what degree that will need attention. Let's see. Then the next Saturday, I'm hoping I'm actually going to make a week from today my 5,000 subscriber special. So I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do. It's probably not going to be this. But there you go. That's the next week or so of Dapper Dino content. I really hope you guys enjoy all of that. There is something coming up later. I think it's the 29th of this month. No, it's not the 29th. It's the 19th. I have to double check. But coming up soon, I am booked on Modern Day Debate to talk to Flat Earth Ozzy Roscoe. So that's an interesting conversation. Yeah. I'm not exactly sure what the topic is going to be. I'm going to have to reach out to James and say, hey, what is the exact topic? But yeah, so that's hopefully coming up. On the 11th, I might have an after show for a Kent Hovind debate against Dr. Dan Stern Cardinalo, if that happens. But anyway, that's basically it. I want to say thank you to everyone who watched. I want to say thank you especially to everyone who recently subscribed, as well as to all my patrons and channel members. You guys really do help a lot. And if any of you do want to join the Patreon or the membership, there are links in the description. It starts for Patreon at $1 per month. For the membership, it's $2. And also on Patreon, you can do an annual pledge for, I think, like a 15% discount if you want. So feel free to support that way. And if not, please just like the video, subscribe if you haven't, and share it if you can. Anyway, that's it for me. I'm going to get out of here. Thank you, everyone. And I will see you, hopefully, on Tuesday.